in this presentation, right, it's all about the game assets. Now, if you ask me, game assets are different types, like right from the 2D, 3D artwork to the music to the UI to the snippets of the code. Everything is game assets. But in this particular session, we'll be only talking about the 2D and 3D art assets and how do we make most of it. How do we optimize them, or how do we make right tools, or how do we use right tools to bring out that quality which is required in games. So to begin with, what are game assets? Now, game assets are elements, basically all kind of elements that are used in video games. Like, that's the simplest definition that I can give you. Now, that consists of multiple things: graphics, be it audio, the music, sound, so the background loops, or the SFX that you use when the character is walking, when he's opening a door, all that stuff. Then there is text, which can come in the game, the information that you provide to the player while you're playing a game, the subtitles, everything. And then there is user interface components, basically HUD, which we call it HUD in games, right? Which is heads up display. These are all UI elements which help the player to track the progress, to see where you are progressing in the game, or multiple other reasons. But UI acts as a supporting element throughout the game, right? So game assets in general are a combination or everything that makes up a game together. So these assets are integral to building the game's environment, characters, and the overall interactive experience that you see in the game. Now, these are a few examples of game assets. This is like a simple 2D sheet of 2D game assets. We call it sprite sheet. There are different names that people use throughout in the industry globally. Some people call it atlas of images. Some people call it sprite sheet. But when people, there are multiple ways how you do this. A few developers, the beginners basically would try to have one image separately stored in the assets folder. So if you see in this example, there would be like 20-30 images separately stored, whereas this is a sprite sheet which is just one image but has different assets on it, and then programmatically, code wise, you choose particular asset that you need in the game. So this is just an example of a 2D asset that is used in a 2D game. This is another example of a 3D asset. So all these things. So if you played games like Clash of Clans, right? So which are isometric, we call it 2.5D, right? These are few assets from one of those games, or just an example of those games. Again, these would not fit in a 2D image, but these are like separate assets textured along with the 3D models and then used in the game. This is another example of a 2.5D or an isometric game, but this is a bit different from the previous this reference, because these are 3D elements, but this is isometric 2.5D but 2D game. So these only will have one particular view, which is the isometric view, and then we can use that in the game. This is again a 3D asset sheet. So like I mentioned in the beginning, there are different types of game assets. It's not just when you say game assets, it's not just 2D or 3D art that you see. It's 2D assets, 3D assets, audio that you use in the game, the code, the snippets that you use, and the text, and there's UI also. But UI usually is considered as a part of 2D asset itself. But in this session, we'll be only focusing on 2D and 3D assets. Audio, code, and text would not be a part of this discussion. So I'll majorly focus on these aspects. Now, when we talk about 2D assets, majorly, there are three types of 2D assets. and this is global. I'm just trying to keep it very generic so that you understand what we use globally when we talk about 2D assets. 2D assets are of three types. Number one is sprites. Sprites or images, whatever you can call it. But these are 2D images that represent characters, objects, scenery, used in 2D games. So majorly used in platformer games. So if you are not really familiar with platformer games, Mario is a classic example of a 2D side scroller platformer game. And in this example also, when you see there's a character and there are different positions of that particular character. So every image that you see of this character is one sprite. When you combine all of these together in a sequence, like you see in this image, it's a simple animation of this character jumping from one spot to another. When you actually use that in a sprite sheet, programmatically, you can call that sequence, and then you'll automatically see that character jumping on that space. Similarly, the second example, the example below that is of that character dying and the soul leaving. So this, and it's, so these are like examples, right? To show it, to have more fluidity to this, there would be like, you only see 4 images here, but actually there would be like 20 images, 24 images. Like 1 second of animation would take 24 images of that, of that same character to show that fluidity. So these are sprites, and we make sprite sheets to make it more optimized, to make it more easier for the engine to just call that sequence as an animation, and then you can use it in the game. So these are sprites. The second thing is the second type is textures. Now textures can be used in a 2D game as well as in a 3D game. So just to give you an example, the image that you see at the bottom, you can actually relate that with a level in a Mario game, right? You usually see that base on which Mario is running. It's quite similar to what you see in this image, right? So you can actually use this image. So these are basically textures that can actually lie on a 3D element, or you can use that directly or in a 2D game. So these are like images that are applied to the surfaces of 3D models to give them color and detail. So when if I go back here and show you an example of this, so where you see in this example, there is a circular thing here which has a blue color and particular text written on it. While you're making a 3D element or a 3D model, you'll just make this plain a cylindrical thing, and on top of that there will be like a simple image, a blue image with the text written on it. That is texture which will be wrapped on this cylinder, so eventually you'll get this output. So this is just one example. Then if you see on this umbrella, it's like a simple semicircle here created, like a dome created, and on top of that there's an image with those yellow and orange colored sections made, which is a texture which is then wrapped on that dome to give you this output. So so these are those structure, the textures, right? So when you have to make to make it more relatable, I'll give you an example of Minecraft also. When you see Minecraft, there's one box that you see, and that box is wrapped with a texture, something similar like this, right? So basically textures, and this is just example of a very basic beginner level example that I'm giving. But when you see a high poly character like a character of Kratos in God of War, right? It's a complete 3D model, but then it is made realistic with all these textures, different textures that are created. Every part of his body is created with a separate part of a texture. So, and then eventually it's wrapped on that character. So that's number two, that's texture. Number three is UI elements. Now, UI elements, like I said before, also visual components of the game's user interface, such as buttons, icons, menus, and health bars. Again, simple example that I've given here is of a mobile game where you see the information which is consistently provided to the user. It's basically UI elements are a medium that a game developer uses to convey messages or to convey the progress to or convey an action to the player. So in this example, there's a pause screen, there's on and off button, there's a home button, back button, there are different buttons, and then there's a complete screen also. So these are all UI elements. In bigger games also, when you see a game like a Street Fighter, you have those meters on top of both the characters, and when you hit someone, there's this health meter which decreases, which is basically UI, but eventually it gives you an understanding of, okay, this is what is happening in the game. So 2D assets, three types, that is it. I mean, there's nothing else in game development. This is 2D. When you consider 2D assets, there are only three types of assets in 2D assets. Let's jump on to the 3D assets. 3D assets also, there are only three types of assets. Number one is models, 3D objects created using vertices, edges. It's kind of technical when you know, using this language also, because this will an artist would relate to all these terms very well. But just to give a perspective, every model, every 3D object that you see in a game is a model, is a 3D model. In this example, there is a house, there is a character that I've given. Now, house is completely non-organic. Character is an organic character because it's there's a lot of work on it. So these includes character, environment, and props. Again, taking you back to this example, all these are models. Everything that you see is a model. This is not because it's 2D. All these are models. Okay. Then there are materials. Now, when you create a model, right, there are two ways to beautify it. Like if you see in this example, in the character that you see here, when you create a model, it's like in one single color, right? Whatever base color that you choose for that character. So let's say we make a character and it looks all white, like a ball here in this, in the third image that you see, fourth image that you see, like a simple white color ball. When you create a model of a character, probably you'll use that material, which is the base level material. Now, there are two ways how you beautify that character. Number one is using a texture, which is the 2D assets. You either make a complete texture with all the eyes, the skin, you know, the shirt texture, the jeans and everything. That's one way to do it. And you then wrap it on this character. That's one way. Number two, the second way is to use material. Now, if you've seen this character, it's a mix of both. But if you see on the fourth image, the girl's image, everything is a material. So her t-shirt is a green color matte material. Her jeans is a blue color matte material. Her hair are a brown color, but there is some specular, and which is why there is a little bit of glossiness on her hair. So for any 3D model, there are two ways to beautify it. Either you put a texture on it, or second, you put a material, you put a set of materials together on that character. So that is materials. Now, assets that define how the surface of a 3D model should look and how it interacts with light. So, you know, just few examples here. Bigger games today show a lot of materials. If you actually see characters like, you know, again, taking an example of God of War, Kratos, there's something that is on his hand, which is a steel armor, which has to have that steel material on it because it has to glow. It has to have that steel effect on it. There would be, you know, something, a leather cover on his shoulder, which should have that leather feel to it. all these, elements are materials. The third thing is basically animation. It's a concept. Basically, it's not nothing, nothing that everybody is good at. But animations are, 3D models. When you create a 3D model, you just rig them with bones, and then you create motions out of it, like walking, jumping, just few examples. So when you have to talk about 3D assets, animations come under assets. So again, summarizing both the slides, right? 2D assets, three types: sprites, textures, and UI elements. 3D assets: models, materials, animations. Now this is a very important slide, and I'll take some time to explain this. There is something, there is this, whatever I'm, showcasing on this slide, uh, it's not from any textbook. There is no chapter, there is no course which talks about principles of effective game asset design. I just put together this slide based on my experience on how would you treat every asset that you're making, and you need to consider these 8 things while you make any asset for your game. And that's where what you see on the screen. I'll talk about each aspect one by one. Number one is consistency. Now, every asset that you make, right, needs to maintain a consistency with the game world and style. Just to give you an example, 5, 6 years back when PUBG came in, PUBG came in India, basically it went all fire, right? So PUBG really worked in India because it had all those realistic graphics, along with, the key elements like the social playing with your friends and all that. But the same things were also available in a game like Fortnite. Then there was Apex Legends, right? But they didn't work, but PUBG worked because it had all these realistic, assets, realistic textures, realistic characters. Now, in a game like that, when you choose your game and you choose your style, if you, just to give an example of a PUBG, if you choose a game like PUBG, and suddenly in that whole environment of realistic art assets, you make like a very stylized asset, like a gun, let's say, like a house which has an art style of Fortnite. It's completely going to be, um, you know, like you can't do that, right? When you decide for an art style, all the art assets that you're making needs to follow that art style, needs to follow that consistency throughout the game world and the style that you use. So number one is consistency. Every asset should be consistent in the style that you use. Number two is optimization. When you say optimization, when so initially when gaming was not that big in India, art was a big career, right? 3D art was a big career, and people um, used to have expertise in creating 3D characters and cars, with like high poly cars and high poly characters, which usually will be used in movies, in VFX industry, in how in movie production houses, right? Where if you are an artist who belongs to that industry, if you're coming from an industry where you only made high poly assets, high poly characters, high poly cars, high poly terrains, right, you would find it difficult to fit those assets in games, because all the game engines have limitations, and game engines, primarily game engines does not have any limitations, but the games that you are making and the audience that you're catering to might not have those high-end devices to run those games. To give you an example, if you're making a game for India, if you're making a game for India, um, you need to know that 70% of the audience in India is from tier 2, tier 3 cities. People sitting in villages who have very low end devices with them. If you're making a mobile game, you would be dealing with 70% of uh, audience who owns low end devices. Now, if you are making a mobile game and if you're making a character which is a high poly character and you're putting it in your game, that is going to drop your frame rate really bad. So, and that is not, that particular thing would probably work in a high-end mobile phone, but it will definitely not work in the low-end device, which your audience really has. So every asset that you make needs to be optimized. You need to make sure that it is optimized to a level that it should run from the number one smartphone to the lowest smartphone that you're building. And it's the same case with PC also. When you try to, when you start building a PC game, you need to make sure there's a benchmark of specifications that you put out, so that people know on what hardware or specifications this particular game would run. And you need to then reverse engineer in a way that your game assets, your game actually should run in that specifications. So optimization is very important. um, Usually, in some cases, when an artist has no idea about optimization, what happens is they tend to make high-end assets, 3D, 2D, whatever. If there is, let's say, this happens in 2D also, and I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a UI element which on the whole screen, it is let's say a 203 and 200 by 200 resolution image, but the artist makes like a 2000 by 2000, 2000 into 2000 resolution, the same image. There's no need to do that. It has to have it has to be made smaller, because then it also takes lesser amount of space to be stored in the engine, right? So usually what happens is artists who are not aware with optimization, they'll make high-end things, and eventually by the end of the development cycle, when the game is about to release, the programmers have to sit and put their head together and try to optimize the whole game at the end, by cutting a lot of elements within the game, which is a bad practice. This is why, as an artist, as a designer, as an artist, you need to be aware that everything that you make, every asset that you make, is optimized in such a way that there's no hassle, and the tech team does not have to then run around to figure out ways to optimize the whole game together. The third thing is details. Attention to details in textures, colors, and shapes add depth and realism. I mean, it's self-explanatory. You'll need every asset that you make needs to have strong detailing into it. Fourth is scalability. This is one of the most important, I feel. Scalability and modularity for reusing assets. Now, um, if you see, there are a lot of assets that people make which are only used one time. There are some assets which can be a part of something else also, which can be reused, right? So keeping all those things in mind, you need to create assets which has more than, which has multiple users to it. Just to give you an example again here, let's say this particular thing is this particular image is divided into three parts, three images, and this right hand image is a standalone separate image. you should be able to use this, reuse it in just dragging, dropping it with this, combining it with something else creates a separate shape altogether. So things like these, like where you make something which can be reused in different assets. So scalability works that way. Again, here an example. So if this is a rock that you've made, putting this rock, combining it with this one, putting it on top of this will create a third asset altogether, right? So making sure that everything that you make, here again, this is a good example. If you see this lamp on this asset, the same lamp is used on this one. This lamp is again used in these two things. So when you make assets and when you're putting so much efforts in creating those assets, make sure that they are scalable, that they can be reused in other things also. Then there's readability, clear and readable design to serve intended purpose. It's similar to details, but then if you're adding some more readable elements into it, they should be very clear. Compatibility, wherever required, compatibility for animation and interaction. So they need, every asset that you make needs to be compatible with the overall environment, the overall every element that you make within the game. So that is important. Adaptability is basically, again, it's an outcome of optimization only. What happens in most of the cases is when you're making a mobile game, you need to make sure that it runs on different resolutions also. When when you're trying to optimize it needs to run on different powered mobiles, but adaptability is about resolution. So maybe the UI element is placed really close to in a small phone. The same UI elements should be automatically adapted to a bigger screen, so they go outside. So a beautiful example of this is a cricket. When you watch, if you watch a cricket match, there is a scoreboard at the bottom. And they purposely leave like some part at the end, which is you can see the asset, but there is nothing written on that. It's just a design. When you see that same match in a small screen, it will only show you till the scoreboard, which is at the bottom. But if you see the match on a bigger screen, you'll see the full strip where the sidebars have nothing written on it, but there's just a design, which is adaptability. Whenever you make assets majorly, and this majorly works on UI elements, that it should work on different resolutions. And the last thing is narrative, integration with the story for enhancement. Everything needs to tell a story. Like, this is metaphorical, but still you need to you need to sync every element with the story. It needs to tell a story. So summarizing the whole thing, again, don't quote me on this. There is nothing officially called as principles of effective game asset design. This is just my understanding, and I do follow this these things when we try to make assets internally also. And I just wanted to give my experience out here. So summarizing it: consistency, optimization, details, scalability, readability, compatibility, adaptability, and it needs to sync with the narrative. So keep this in mind, and I think you'll have a very streamlined pipeline with you when you actually make a game, and you'll cut down a lot of other thoughts which unnecessarily increases your production timeline. Just a few of my favorite tools that I feel you should, if you're not, you should immediately pick up and start experimenting with. Effective tools for 2D game art assets. Number one is Photoshop, obviously. There's Illustrator. Photoshop and Illustrator both are paid, but they have a lot more features in it. So if you If you can afford a student license or anything, you should definitely get it. If not, there is GIMP always, which is free. You can, download a free version of GIMP and you can start using GIMP to create similar things that you can make on Photoshop. Although the UI, the interface of GIMP is a bit complicated compared to Photoshop, and I think everybody has used Photoshop at some point in your life. So there is like a um, automatic sense of just doing things the way you do in Photoshop, but you can't do that in GIMP. If you are facing this problem, then I have a very beautiful solution for that. There's something called as Photopea. You can just go on Chrome and write photopea.com. It's an exact replica of Photoshop that you can use. Again, I am just trying to help you guys in the terms where if you want to use the same features and the same sort of interface that you used in Photoshop, but you don't want to, you want to do it for free, there's Photopea that you can use. And I think most of the studios prefer using this, so there's no harm in doing this. So try using Photopea if you haven't. Then for the animations, there is something called a spine. Definitely try and experiment with spine tool. It's a simple way where you can create a 2D art asset. You can just import a 2D art asset, put a skeleton on it, and start animating your 2D characters. For 3D, obviously Maya is something that a lot of studios use, Maya and 3D Max, ZBrush also. But again, just like Photopea, there is something called as Blender, which is completely free that you can use. Although the user interface and the polish or the number of features that Maya or 3D Max provides, you wouldn't get that in Blender. But I mean, you can. It's not that you can't do certain stuff in Blender. It's just that if certain thing takes 2 steps in Maya or 3D Max, it'll take 5 steps in Blender. That is it. But the beauty of using Blender is it's a free tool. And to be honest, I'll just give you an industry insight also. If you know Maya as a 3D artist, if you know Maya or 3D Max, you're good. But if along with that, if you know Blender and if you can create the similar output that you can do on Maya and Max on Blender, I think you have a plus point, because obviously all these tools are expensive for smaller studios, mid-scale studios, and they don't prefer to have like 10 licenses because every license is very expensive. You can actually use that. You can actually use Blender to create the similar assets, and if you are expert in that, you'll be preferred among the other candidates as well. So I think again that's one, and you should actually try learning it on yourself. It's a self-learning tool. When you are good at Maya and 3D Max, when you master that, it'll be very easy for you to jump into Blender. For texturing, the textures that I mentioned, and the materials, you use Substance Painter. It's a beautiful tool that you can use to wrap textures on your 3D models. Lastly, there are a few key tips that I just wanted to give you before I wrap it up for and I open for Q&A. Number one is layer management. Now, most of the times what happens is game development is an iterative process, and it will keep on going till the game is launched. Every small asset, let's say, a senior person from a management quickly comes and tells you that we need a, let's say, a key art image for the game on social media. and you're a 2D artist, and you just use Photoshop quickly, use images from your game and add some more things on it, some title on it, some more PNGs, and make it, you create a good composition and create an image, and you give it to the social media, to the guy to use it in social media. Usually what happens is this all these things happen very quickly, and you lose a track of managing these things very well. So it happens in most cases that people just do it, just export a normal JPG, PNG, and just finish their work. If in case there are issues, there are changes in that particular thing, you wouldn't be able to do that if you haven't done layer management. So everything that you make, every 2D composition image that you make, try using layers in any tool that you use, be it Photoshop, be it Photopea, any tool. Try using layers that can have separate things under them, so that whenever you have to go back and do some changes, you can easily do that, right? So make sure layer management is followed when you create 2D images in any smallest of the UI element to the biggest key art used in the game. This is also important, feedback and iteration. Regularly seek feedback on the asset from team members. What looks good in the design phase might not always work well in the game. It's as simple as that. And majorly with the artists, we all love our own creative process, and we feel whatever. At one point of time, there is something called as product ego that comes within our way, right? So when you're doing that, it happens that what you make, you fall in love with that, and you're very rigid, we are very stubborn to make changes to it because you feel that it's right. And there's nothing wrong in it, because probably you have 10 years of experience doing that, and that is why you feel what you're doing, what you're making is beautiful and is right, and it is in sync with the game. But try getting feedback from your team members. Try being very neutral about whatever you make, so that there are two things that happen when you do that. One is, eventually it helps the game, because when a cumulative decision comes from everybody, when you get genuine feedback on your work, eventually that helps you build something which helps the game, right? And the second thing is, you yourself improve by doing this, because then you also start understanding people's perspective on everything, right? So it's very important. Feedback is something which you should definitely take every now and then and iterate based on the feedback. Legal consideration, for every asset that you make, you need to keep a track of that. Like most of when you're making something, you try to search it on internet, you find something which is close to what you want to make, you use it for reference. Sometimes you're very lazy to not get just inspired by it, but sometimes you use that particular thing in your asset, right? So you don't want to fall into a legal battle with legal issue with anybody who owns that particular image. So whenever you are trying to get inspired from something, or you want to use something, just make sure that you've checked the license very well if you want to use that. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of problem eventually, and this has happened with a lot of people, a lot of companies also, in the gaming industry. So you can't do that. I don't know if you guys know, but like 3 years back, Voodoo created an exact same game like some other developer, and they lost that legal case because it was frame by frame copied. Every asset was frame by frame copied from that one particular game. And eventually, I think they had to pay like $180,000 or something just to clear the name from that. So you need to make sure that you're out of all these. And on top of this, I would also recommend not getting inspired conceptually is great by using AI tools, but try keeping a distance from using those in your assets, because eventually it's referred from something which is out there on the internet. Lastly, everything that you do, try to document it. Maintain a record of the asset creation process. Now, when you're a small team, when you are doing something new, or when you're at a stage where you in the beginning of your career, everything that you do is new for you, right? Which is why you need to be you need to track down, or you need to document a process that you've done, so that you can use it as a library to when you have to do similar sort of work. So this can be very useful for you, because sometimes, let's say you've created some 3D asset, and then it took you like 10 steps to get to there. 1 month later, you'll not remember what you exactly did to get to that point. But if you document that particular thing, it really helps you. So documentation is important, and it's not just while you're making assets, but documentation in general is very important in any domain: game design, tech, or even QA. So yeah, that these are four, I think, four important key tips that I can give you. And that is what I had for today.